et chef de Pink Floyd, avec Rick Wright, organiste, Roger Waters, bassiste, et Nick Mason, batteur.
If I can remember what it was that we were going to play next, I'd tell you, but I can't, so I won't.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fingal's Cave podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest who is the producer and director of the highly acclaimed documentaries The Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd Story and The Story of Wish You Were Here. Around 2 years ago, he began the task of digitizing and uploading unedited interviews from his films to his YouTube channel. With more than 1 million views, the Pink Floyd-related uploads created interest and excitement amongst the community. Of course, I'm talking about John Edginton. Hello, John, and welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Hi, Niels. Very good to be on the show too. I'm delighted to have attracted your attention. Very, very pleased indeed.
Great. So, first question of all, because it's a Pink Floyd podcast and we love to talk about Pink Floyd. So, you produced your first Pink Floyd documentary about Syd Barrett in 2001. Were you already a Pink Floyd fan at that point, or are you even a Pink Floyd fan?
I certainly am now. In 2001, the main driving motivation for making this film, was not Pink Floyd's music so much as Syd Barrett, the man, and what had happened to him. I was aware of Pink Floyd in the late 60s. I may or may not have gone to the UFO Club in London when they were playing in 66, early 67. I never, as they say, certain things are lost in the mists of time. I was aware of Pink Floyd becoming a much bigger band in the mid-70s. I think my interest was always more Dylan, Neil Young, the sort of development of music in the 70s. I hate to say it was much more US based, and I got fairly irritated with British prog rock fairly early. In fact, when punk arrived, I kind of couldn't have come quickly enough. So I'm a terrible person in terms of being a Pink Floyd fan at that time. I don't have those stories. However, I think the thing about this is that because I come from it with a very different perspective. I'm a documentary maker, so in a way, this film, the first film I do on Pink Floyd or on Syd Barrett, it was originally called Syd Barrett Crazy Diamond when it was first shown on the BBC in 2001, and my intention was a quest to discover what had happened to Syd, what his experience had been that caused him to disappear from the music scene at the height of his success, in a way, and his creative energy, and slowly fade until he pretty much disappeared altogether into a completely secluded life in Cambridge. When I made the film, he was still alive in 2001, so he was there. And I can go into why I was motivated to do this, because I was interested in the whole issue of what LSD was, how influential LSD was. And I have a son who himself was a very young musician who took a lot of LSD rather tragically early in his 17, 18, and had a total mental breakdown, essentially.
Okay.
And it's never really recovered, and this is like 30 plus years ago, you know. So I always attributed that to LSD,
yeah.
to the LSD he took, and my feeling was I wanted to make a film about LSD, like the influence of it, why it was seen as so mind-opening in one way and counterculturally exciting in the 60s. And to what extent was it actually responsible for that kind of damage? So thinking about that, I thought of why not choose somebody, a celebrity kind of story, which wasn't very well known. You know, people who played Dark Side of the Moon, they didn't realize that Sid was...
Yeah, I would say amongst the
kind of,
hardcore fans that was well known, but not to the main
the
fans, true.
Fan, given that it's a huge best-selling album over many, many years, you know. I can't quote the number of years it's been on the the charts in the US, but it's running into probably a decade. So it seemed to me, you know, I looked around. I remember looking into Rocky Erickson, the 13th Floor Elevators, the guy in Austin who had apparently a similar kind of experience to Sid. There is a great documentary about him that's out around. But Sid seemed to me to be a much better choice, actually. So but the key thing was, you know, could I get anyone interested in taking part? And that was the starting point in very, very early 2001, maybe late 2000, when I sort of initially decided to go for this.
Yeah, so when I watched the film again, I think it's really carried by a certain sadness and pain and almost disbelief at Syd Barrett's sudden personality change. How much of a sense of Sid did you get from talking to the people you interviewed? Was it the same kind of mood they had about it?
Yes. In a way, probably at different levels. If you to go through the band members, I think Roger appears surprisingly moved, and I say surprisingly because I was warned many times by many people that Roger was kind of a difficult character.
Yeah, we come back to that later.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so he came across as being surprisingly emotional in his interview. David Gilmour, as you can see the full interview on my YouTube channel, as the interview progresses, he becomes more and more thoughtful and more getting into how it was when he was trying to help Syd Barrett put together the two solo albums. And I think the tremendous sort of struggle around that was very painful to experience, and fantastic that he stuck with it, really. I think Rick Wright, and I think he was probably the most honest in a way, because he talked about how, you know, was he 21 years old, Rick? You know, at that point, they're going on a fantastic kind of journey here, crisscrossing the country, you know, in pretty lousy transport. I mean, he just said, you know, that they bought a Bentley to drive around in to go. He said it was a total death trap, and it's a second-hand Bentley that they all piled into with all the gear and everything. You know, they didn't have a proper bus, you know, a band vehicle. It was, so it was up and down.
Yeah, there are photos of that car, yes.
And he was saying, you know, this kind of, you're 21, the excitement is all in, we're making this and we're getting attention, and we're in, it was a very exciting point where the Piper at the Gates of Dawn was just coming out, you know, and literally their lead singer, lead man, you know, lead songwriter is falling apart, you know. And I think he conveyed really well the kind of difficulty, personal difficulty, but also the sort of, you know, we just have to get on, you know. I mean, it's painful when he tells the story of saying Sid is actually living with him, and the day they decide not to take him with them to a gig, and he just says, I'm just popping out for a packet of cigarettes, and he returns, you know, hours later, having done the gig, and Sid says, "Did you get the cigarettes?" I mean, it's, you know, it's just.
It is terribly sad, yes.
Sad. So I think it's those things. Now, I think with Nick's got a great way of describing how, in a way, everyone sort of identifies Sid as the problem. But this is fascinating to me when Nick says, but I think possibly we were the problem for Sid, you know. In other words, looking at the kind of genius, in a sense, Sid was, where he was totally tuned in to some kind of inner songwriting ability, where the songs just seemed to come out. You know, he wrote 8 of the songs on Piper at the Gates of Dawn. You know, I think it's Rick who says, you know, he'd sort of go into a room, come out in 20 minutes, and there was another song. And there was no sense of this was difficult for him. This was, you know, the whole. Well, I can talk about Sid for a long time, but that kind
Please
of
do.
is very rare, but it's also kind of vulnerable. You know, it's a rare kind of artistic sense that perhaps the other band members were much more intent on driving forward as a band, and something stopped Sid. Certainly, probably the LSD had a big effect on that, and it kind of, you know, maybe the first phase of him slowing down and stopping. But judging, you know, there's still something there, because the 2 solo albums that are made a year or 2 later have so much creativity in them. They're very, very different in terms of the conception and the execution. Not anything like as polished as, but, you know. So I think Nick's point has always stuck in my head when he said that maybe we were the problem for Sid. Um, and I think
Yeah, I think with Roger. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, yeah,
I I think with Roger Waters in the band and the whole the different members later on, of course, David Gilmour. I think there might have been a pressure from the first moment on, and maybe Syd Barrett was just not, as many great musicians, was just not ready for it somehow to be successful, to be in a band where there are goals to reach or anything. And I think watching the documentary you did about him really creates that or recreates that feeling that they just didn't know what was happening, and they were overwhelmed by this. And he was,
Sure.
of course, and the LSD thing might be the thing, but there are many rumors and many wrong stories. And I know that that the Barrett family suffered a lot from all these wrong stories and wrong telling. And I mean, David Gilmour told in his interview that he was also taking some LSD and he was quite happy with it, or not happy, but it was all okay. So I think it would be the easiest and at the same time the wrongest thing to say he took LSD one night, it was too much, and then he lost it. I mean, it's
Yes.
not that easy, I would say.
Yes. I think that account sort of rests on Rick talking about the weekend when they were recording at the BBC and Sid didn't turn up, and then by the end of the weekend, they still didn't know where he was, and then the management announced that something had happened to Sid and that he was affected by this, and Rick ascribed it to LSD, and Sid's consumption of LSD. I mean, I don't know how much weight you give to that kind of event in itself. It's Rick, the witness, was also in his interview saying very candidly, look, he says it a lot in his interview, look, these are just memories, and memories are very unreliable. So there's a bunch of memories here, all the way through David's interview. And this is 2001, we're not talking 2021. In 2001, David's recall exactly of the different moments and the different, when they first went on the first gig with David and Sid together. He remembers that, but he doesn't remember exactly when they stopped with Sid. These things are all very much to do with memory, and it's for any biographer of the Pink Floyd or of Sid. This is such a tangled story. I think Rob Chapman did very well in his book, because he does try to separate out all this, the sort of the legend from the stories from the facts. But facts are extremely elusive. So yeah.
Yeah, it's. I experienced the interview with Rick Wright the same way you did at the time. I would say I think it's the most open, most emotional, and personal interview, and it's a funny thing. Maybe funny is the wrong word in that term, but it's interesting to see that he claims being of course, I wouldn't say best musician, but the most trained musician in the beginning, together with Syd Barrett, and
Yes.
they were the creative force, so to speak, in the beginning.
Yes.
And after Sid left, he was weakened already in his position in the band,
Yes.
because David and Roger took over. And it's interesting how Richard describes that their long improvisation on Ummagumma and later on the concerts in 71 They were not just because they were a perfect psychedelic band doing improvisations, but because they were lacking of new ideas and new songwritings. And that just came up later on. I mean, Atom Heart Mother, they needed Ron Geeson to support them to create anything of value out of that. And it's very interesting. But coming back to Roger Waters in his interview, it's interesting for me to see that you find his way of being interviewed, that he's emotional being interviewed. And the only thing I could have think of when I watched it was that he's talking about his issues and his problems with Syd Barrett. In my opinion, he wasn't talking too much about Syd Barrett and Syd Barrett's problems, but what happened to Roger Waters because of Syd Barrett. Of course he's sad. They're all sad, but it was a very different view in my opinion.
That's fascinating that you took that from him. One thing that's to kind of support what you're saying just for a minute is that there's an element in Roger that seems to be sort of overly amused by some of the things that happened, and that he sees them as a subject for telling stories, you know, and I think it's sort of disturbing in a way, because on the one hand, what Roger's saying, he really missed Syd, misses him to this day, kind of thing, in 2001, and you know, fully expresses how much Syd meant at the time of making Piper at the Gates of Dawn. But on the other hand, he's kind of turning some of the darker episodes around Syd being unable to play, and you know, the embarrassment of certain situations when Syd wasn't performing. You know, he's sort of turning a little bit too much into a subject for hilarity. So yeah,
little episodes.
I get what you're saying.
About.
Yeah. You know, there is a sense. I mean, the character of Roger Waters comes through both these documentaries in different. You know, it's absolutely fascinating. David is all the time trying to be generous, but you know, you can almost feel the suppressed irritation in him with Roger when he talks about Roger having the lyric writing role, you know, that he doesn't want to share it. You know, so it's like Roger goes off and writes the words. David's quite generous too in describing how brilliant some of those words are and how they work with, you know, with Wish You Were Here, for instance, the song. But on the other hand, you know, his kind of frustration is just underneath some of the stuff he's talking about, I think, you know. And it's very interesting when I...
Yes, I get what you mean.
Trying to talk to him a little bit about the influence of the ghost of Syd in some of Pink Floyd's later work, you know. And I mentioned The Wall, and David sort of bristles slightly and says, "What's that got to do with Syd?" And then he's like, and then I explained, well, he's there in, you know, Comfortably Numb, and he's there in the movie, the character played by Bob Geldof.
But was he there on a personal level, or as a, I would say, as a role, as a figure, whatever you call it?
As a figurehead. yeah,
Yes.
representative of madness. But I think David says something like to the effect of, "I don't think I can be bothered with the wall." In other words, essentially, oh, for God's sake, don't.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
bear it.
Let it go.
Don't let's never talk about the
Yeah.
wall again, kind of thing. And you understand that was Roger
But what?
taking full and total command, and
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
it's also
yeah,
it's also very interesting that Richard Wright describes his first emotional cracks between him and Roger, which appeared on your second documentary movie, The Story of Wish You Were Here,
yeah,
where he's again, Roger Waters, Roger Waters is he's a really tough nut to crack, I would say. He said, his musical contributions, Richard's musical contributions, he was great playing, but he didn't get the concept. It's so, wow, I watched it again and I thought, okay, he's really openly, he's weakening him again and again and again. And David, in comparison, he's very professional and just describing. I don't want to bash Roger Waters. It's just what I'm experiencing on these interviews, because you mentioned the suppressed opinions they all have, and the only one where it's Nick also, but also Richard Wright, where I don't get that feeling. But David Gilmour's very careful with his words. And Roger, in the end, is quite aggressive, even to you, I would say, as the interview. I don't know how you experienced that. He's staring a lot, and you ask a question, and he says, "How do you mean that? Why?" So, like that. How did you experience that during the interview?
Yeah. Well, this didn't surprise me at all. The thing is, Roger Waters kind of slightly bullying, very, very much alpha male, and also, I think his weakness, he's got great qualities, obviously, in terms of being able to organize and get a record together like Wish You Were Here, when they, in the studio, were really they're all sort of isolated, separate personalities in a sense. I think his weakness, though, is that he's I don't know, is it incredible insecurity that's behind it? Because he has to say that and he's saying it more and more now in recent pronouncements, I'm basically the guy who did these records, and he says in the interview that I did for the one you're referring to, for The Story of Wish You Were Here, he says to the effect, it's the songwriting, but he said you can get a good guitarist. There's no problem. There's loads of good guitarists around. It's it's the writing. It's the and what he's saying essentially is, well,
it's almost passive aggressive.
Yeah, but then
yeah.
The interesting thing about the difference between these two documentaries is that one is my own film about Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd, without anyone leading me or telling me the kind of film that I should be making. There's no self-interested band members sitting there on my shoulder. It's unauthorized, but they all took part, they did it without the approval of their manager, who didn't even know about it until I'd got the interviews in the can, and then he kind of went berserk. And
Okay, I just
know
wanted to ask you
how on earth this could possibly have happened.
Yes.
It happened because I went about it in a very, very careful, personal way. I went to Rosemary Barrett first and sought her approval, and then she agreed to help me. She didn't want to be named on it. She didn't want anyone to know. And she didn't want Sid to know, because she thought that he would not have liked the film being made. He didn't want any attention, you know. That was her opinion. So she said, you know, if you contact David, I'm sure he'll help you. So my first thing was to go to David, and then having gone to David and secured his agreement, I then went to Roger, and basically because David was going to do it, he wanted to do it.
Of course.
It's almost like, well, do you care about Sid or don't you? This is the Sid Barrett story, you know. And so that's how it. When it got to Rick, you asked me actually whether I chose to interview Rick last for a reason. I interviewed Rick last because when I first approached Rick through his agent, I was told, well, you know, why don't you interview the others? Because Rick's a very shy guy, and he doesn't really like doing interviews. And you know, if you feel you've got enough from the others, you probably won't need to have Rick. It was that kind of thing. So, having got the three of them, I thought, come on, you know, we've got to have Rick. This is essential.
Yeah.
We've got to have them all. So I went back to the agent again, and very, very quickly he said, well, actually, I think it was a woman, the agent. She said, let me just ask him. She said, hang on, I'll call him up. So she called him up and she said, could hear her, you know. I've got this producer here and he's doing this, you know, you might have heard of the Sid Barrett documentary. And apparently what he said to her was, oh, well, just give him my number and ask him to call me.
Yeah.
So
great.
And then I called Rick, and this extremely sort of self-effacing, quiet man, you know.
And he invited you to his house, am I correct?
Yeah, he said, come over, when's a good time?
Yeah.
So, and then, you know, it's very, very nice when you get that. In a way, it was like that with David too, because I went to his barn studio in the country and I spent the whole, like 3 or 4 hours, as long as I'm very relaxed. And with Rick, it was the whole afternoon, you know, however long you want.
And it turned out extremely helpful to have him.
Well, yeah,
I would say.
Because the more you stayed, the more you got to the real man. You know, you got to the.
Yes.
You got away from like. You don't have.
And until that point, there were almost no interviews of him, almost no. So this was just the premiere to have him talking openly, freely, without the other band members around.
Yes.
So I think it's a very important interview.
Thank you. A nice touch was 2 or 3, maybe just before the pandemic, I think, his family, one of his children got in touch and asked me if they could use some of the interview on their. They were setting up the Richard Wright Music website, and they were putting some interviews, and they wanted to have. I think it was the one I'd put up first, which was maybe 25 minutes, something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I was very happy about that because
Yeah.
they felt it was pretty unique.
Yeah. So coming back to David Gilmour, watching the interview with David Gilmour, it's always, how do I put it? It's special because he somehow always seems a bit dissociated to what he's telling. He's always in a good mood. He's always very polite and telling the stories. I mean, of course, for him, the whole Syd Barrett tragedy must be really strange because it was his entry and his only entry to the band. So of course he should feel a bit lucky about it. But on the other hand, he did not know him as much as all the other band members did. But so he is in a strange position, kind of way. But anyway,
Yeah.
listening to his interviews, he's always, I wouldn't even say, a bit too professional about everything.
Yeah. It's interesting at the end of that first interview in 2001, he almost didn't want us to go. I had a book with me, which was had just come out, which was a book that I think it's by David Parker. If it's not, you'll have to edit that out. But it's a book of all the Pink Floyd live performances, I believe. Literally every single performance they ever played in a book, right? And he actually sat and said, could he have a look at it? And he sat there and he went, right. This is fascinating because that he might be wrong about that. I'm not sure we played twice in one day there, but we definitely did that. It's very, and I had the film crew with me, and we all we had to move on. We were going to go and interview Jerry, the drummer who played drums on Barrett, and he was like 30 miles away, and we had to get going, and I was trying to sort of politely wrestle this. And I said, well, look, David, why don't you keep the book? And he said, oh, no. He said, no, it's just it's sort of enjoyable talking to you about everything. It sort of triggered a few things. And then he said, I have to tell you the truth. I do feel that he said, I don't know, I always feel like I'm inarticulate. Do you think it went okay? And of course, I said, no, not at all. You're not inarticulate in any way. You came across very well. And he said, I just don't want to come across as being like inarticulate. And I wondered whether this was something that's because he wasn't the lyric writer. That was in my head was, and Roger was the man with the words, and I just wondered whether that was something that was eating at him a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I think the whole structure of the band is somehow like a very fragile house, this.
Yes.
You have the songs, the songwriting, you have the musical part where, of course, David and Rick, I mean, they were still the best musicians, of course.
Yes.
And Nick doing his drums and Roger just being the driving force, and it was from the beginning a very strange symbiotic thing.
Absolutely. I think it's the nature of a kind of it's when there's lots of different circumstances that bring together the overall output of a band, obviously. And if Syd hadn't withdrawn, David would never have arrived.
Yes.
We don't know quite how that would have progressed. If Syd had been fully functioning, maybe the band that emerged would have been much more Sid and Rick.
Maybe they would have split up.
They may have, yeah.
Maybe that.
Yeah. Hard to know, of course, because you can't really write.
So I also rewatched your fantastic documentary about Phil Collins and Genesis, and I noticed that this film's produced quite differently, of course. So were the circumstances of the interviews which dictated the approach on the story of Wish You Were Here being so differently, or was it in the beginning that you decided to make a totally different documentary there about Genesis and Phil Collins, because you gathered them in one room and it was a complete different feeling about it?
Sure. There's no way we could have got Pink Floyd together in one room to Wish You Were Here.
Yes.
I think that, so my sort of background, I made a lot of documentaries before I did the Syd Barrett film, and my approach has been generally to make them as I think the word I'm looking for is like, the degree of trust involved is kind of crucial. I made documentaries about people on death row. Making a documentary with a band is peanuts compared to getting into filming in death row.
Yeah,
you have an element of in good documentaries where you really want the collaboration of everyone. You don't want to deceive people or kind of set them up against each other. So I literally come to these as I'm telling a story, and I'm telling it from the point of view of everyone who experienced in terms of past stories or is experiencing this story. I don't want what I call I don't want outsiders telling me. For instance, with music documentaries, so often it's really I can't take it much longer. A lot of the music documentary could be taken up with outsiders coming in and telling you what is going on with these artists at this particular point. Someone wrote a book about them, someone's a journalist, music journalist. So you're getting this constant kind of filtering of the experience.
And framing already.
And framing the experience. So when it came to, let's take the story of Wish You Were Here. Because I was known to have made a film about Sid, and I filmed everybody, I was approached by music publishing company, Eagle Rock in London, and they had been talking to David Gilmour's manager about making a film about the story of Wish You Were Here, because of the anniversary, and they were putting out a reissue of all the material around it, etc. And would I be interested in helping? So I agreed. It very quickly emerged that Roger wasn't interested in doing it, and before I came on the scene, he said, he was at loggerheads with David over some piece that had come out in Rolling Stone, I think it was, where David talked about the writing of the song Wish You Were Here, and Roger felt offended that maybe his role was being slighted. Something as seemingly petty as that had set him off on like, oh, I'm not having any, and this is all coming from the management of, you know, Gilmour's management. Forget it, I'm not interested. But the hypocrisy behind this, if I can use that word, is that Roger, you know, inevitably is going to benefit from all the merchandise that will spill forth when it's the anniversary issue of, you know, the album plus everything else, and of course he's going to benefit from it. So he starts muttering away apparently in the background about how he'll do his own version, etc. So, you know, I'm brought into this very toxic atmosphere. So they said, well, we can't do it if Roger doesn't take part. So I made the not that brilliant suggestion. Why don't we make the film without Roger and then show it to him?
Okay.
And if he agrees,
that's a bold move.
Succumb and likes and thinks it's good and would be so much better if he was in it. You know. And they all sort of took a deep breath and said, okay, we agree. So this was a very short production period, because by this point, I think we'd got to late August 2011, and I interviewed David Gilmour. Yeah, before September. It was very late August. And we did the interview with the editor at Abbey Road with all the tapes, and we interviewed Nick at King's Cross, you know, hoovered up the members of the story. And the other thing that I insisted was, we have to make this very rich, and there's no real live footage of them playing from the album Wish You Were Here. There's some very, very bad bootleg stuff, like really, you know, this is the age of this pre-video, 70s. So we relied very, very much on the ability to tell the story through the interviews, and with fantastic stills. There's hardly any live footage in that.
Yeah, and on the mixing desk, which was a very valuable part.
Mixing desk stuff, exactly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Jill Filmanovsky, the very young photographer, went into Abbey Road, was given free access to them at a period when they were, you know, fairly at a loose ends. Although it's great that Roy Harper happens to be standing in there, because he's going to sing Have a Cigar for them. So great pictures of that, you know. So anyway, I looked at the timetable. By August the 7th, we had by October the 7th, so we're talking maybe 5 weeks. Incredibly intense. No American filmmaker would dream of doing anything that fast. And I'm not trying to do a kind of MTV style thing at all. I'm trying to do something which really, you know, where there is space. It's not just not just wham, 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 wham. It's like, and it's thoughtful, and it gets a little deeper. So by October the 7th, we had a rough cut. sent it to Roger. He had my phone number, and I was like a few nerve-wracking days when I thought, because basically what they said to me was, well, if Roger doesn't agree, we'll have to scrap the whole thing. So that's the end of your contract, John. Bye-bye. You know. So, you know, what a crazy business documentary making is, you know. So
Yeah.
at the end of, maybe it was about 5 days in my memory, I think. Roger called me, and he was complimentary, you know. But of course,
Nice.
I had him very carefully sort of primed, because I just wanted to steer him to say, yeah, there's some things that we could improve on, and some things that, you know, let's get a few
Something
things,
is missing, or
let's get a
someone.
few things right here.
Yes.
And I said, well, when do you want to do it? And, you know, pretty much dictate, we can rent a studio, you know, as near to your home as possible in New York. He lived in New York at that time, you know, at a time of your choosing, etc., etc. And so we actually, it was a very, in one way, I mean, he's the oddest of guys, Roger, you know. So we rented a very nice little recording studio, great, perfect for this, with wooden walls and, you know, lovely atmosphere, which he loved. He walked in, he loved it. He's very comfortable. His manager said, just get him sort of 6 bottles of Beck's on the side. This was lunchtime. Roger doesn't do lunch. I thought it was interesting.
Okay. Yes.
Drinks, you know. So we had the bottles of Beck's lined up, and he comes in. He has brought his guitar with him, which I have to say was great to see, because he'd already seen David play.
Yes, in 2001.
Wish You Were Here and the opening of Shine On, you know.
Yes.
So he'd seen in, yeah. So he comes in, and it was a time of Occupy Wall Street was going on, and Roger loves to tell you about his political leanings, and so
Still
we
does.
spent about half an hour, which we filmed, none of which we could use, where he talks all about, you know, how great it is to support this, and, you know, has a go about all the evils of capitalism, etc., etc.
I think that's sorry to interrupt you there, but I think that's the important difference between you and a journalist. A journalist might stop there and said, "Yeah, but there's something else I want to talk with you about." But you have to stay patient and calm and just let it go to get there where you want to go.
I have to go
Correct?
where I want to go, and where I want to go is that he's happy, relaxed, that at some point he's going to pick up that guitar,
Yes.
but he's also going to talk fully about the subject at hand, and he knows this. You know he knows this.
Yes.
It's almost like he's staking out his territory and trying to work out who's in charge.
Yes.
In fact, I know I'm in charge, and he probably finds that difficult. So he has to assert. So then you picked up a little bit of aggression, because I say cast your mind back, you know, to that point when this album's taking shape, and he immediately becomes kind of like a little agitated, and a little. It's almost like I've asked the wrong question. You know.
Yes.
So okay, you go ahead, Roger. Tell us whatever you want to tell us. You know, and it proceeds in that way. But he does loosen up, and he starts to. There's one point where he says, "Don't get me started," and it's all
Yes.
around. How did you write "Wish You Were Here"? How was that written? And he's absolutely obsessed with this idea that somehow David is putting around that they sat in a room and wrote it together. Right? I've never sat in a room with anyone and written anything, any song ever. I've never done that. Blah 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 blah. Well, what's the puzzling thing about this is if you watch what he says, he then proceeds to describe pretty much, not them necessarily in the same room, but pretty much how they wrote this together. Because he hears David plays the tune, he hears it and goes, wow, play me some more of that. And then he says, okay, I'm going to write some words to it, Well,
which sounds like a perfect creative process in the end.
Exactly. So where is the big beef here?
Yeah.
But then he belittles it by saying, it's a very simple tune. I mean,
Yeah.
I learned the tune in 5 minutes.
Lee Harris said something nice about him. He didn't want to meet him in the backstage when Roger came to New York playing Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun together with Nick Mason's Soulful Secret Band.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, no, I didn't went to the backstage room because I didn't want to spoil the moment. Because, Roger can be prickly. And I think it's a very good description of everything around him.
Yes, I think that's right. There's plenty of examples I could give you from other people.
So what insights during the making of the film surprised you most? What would you say was the most surprising thing you realized during making the films?
I think I'm always, well, in both the films, I mean, this is something as a filmmaker that I love, is discovering these characters, and with both these films, these characters emerge that you could say, well, they're minor characters, but they're also very kind of influential at the different stages. So with the story of Wish You Were Here, the absolutely delightful experience, which influenced the film in quite a few ways, was meeting their ex-landlord, Mike Leonard, who lived in the same house still that they lived in as students when they were studying to be architectural students, and Sid was at Camberwell, and they were just initiating this early phase of Pink Floyd, as yet unnamed, I think, at that point. But it certainly did get named during the course of the period there, because they appeared as Pink Floyd in this BBC science documentary, Tomorrow's World, where Mike Leonard, their landlord and university teacher, lecturer at Hounslow College of Art, I think it was, he was developing all these ideas around sound and light. And so somebody at the BBC's science unit picked up on this and had a demonstration in the house, the same house, with the band sitting in the background playing and they refer to them as Pink Floyd, and they're noodling away on, very, very quietly, very low key. And it's what was so fantastic about Mike Leonard was that he had things like the Vinson tucked away in the attic, rusting. He pulled out this equipment. He said, "Oh, I think I've still got this here somewhere." The Farfizos, and
Unbelievable.
and then he showed us the lighting equipment. Anyway, during the course of this, we filmed this. I knew about this film, the Science Tomorrow's World film, but I'd only seen a very kind of rough VHS copy, and no one seemed to have a master of it, a decent copy at all. And the BBC said they couldn't find it. It may no longer exist, And so I said to Mike, "Have you any idea? Did they ever?" He said, he sort of looked around and said, "Where is it? Where is it?" He said, "Okay."
Oh, come on.
Goes over, picks
Yeah.
up literally, it's like a can of film, and said, "They sent me a copy. It's been sitting here ever since." And it's a can of film,
Unbelievable.
Tomorrow's World, particular date,
Yeah.
sort of early 60s. We took it away, transferred it, and then told the BBC, and they made a copy for themselves, So there's huge serendipity of this.
Yes.
But what was interesting, because then in the interviews I did with all the members, including Bob Close, because the fifth member of Pink Floyd at that point, and Bob was also living in the house, they all referred to Mike Leonard because he played a piano and an organ, At one point, Rick tells, I think, the story of how he went on holiday. So Mike Leonard stepped in and became the organist in the band for a few embryonic Pink Floyd shows. But it's just what I think the surprising thing is when you discover people who literally are the people you want them to be, This
Yes.
is not,
You can't get closer.
there's no way you can make this person up. You can't.
No.
It's not a fictional character. He's not a stuff of legend. He's here. And, sadly, he passed away, I think, around 2013, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
But in the
Well,
house.
that's
to the
a
end.
wonderful story.
Yeah. I think there's a few, meeting Dougie Fields still in the same flat, the same apartment that Sid lived in with him in 68, 69. Fantastic.
Yeah,
guy.
it's something we talk about, Ian and me, in the first episode, that all these people being personally involved, knowing these people, they are in their, I would say, mid to late 70s now,
Yes.
and it's so important to get like this film, to
Yes.
get it archived
Absolutely.
somehow, to get it digitized. It's a
Yeah.
very important thing to do, so it
Yeah.
all gets lost otherwise.
That's
Would be
exactly
a
it.
shame.
And you can go through, unfortunately Mike Leonard, unfortunately Dougie Fields died in 2021. Rick Wright, obviously, in 2008,
Yes.
So it's, to me, I made that film at the right time, and that there's been a lot of attention on Syd Barrett since, but I feel it was a seminal film that, I took a chance on, because initially no one was particularly interested in funding this film. There was a lot of luck.
Yeah, and it's a lovely result. So it's a wonderful movie.
Thanks.
So
I probably lost track of your question as well.
Oh no, that's no problem. That's no problem at all. So as we discussed, you've been running a brilliant YouTube channel for some time now, and you uploaded some unedited interviews, excerpts, and other interesting snippets. What made you start this channel? Was it the same idea of archiving things, or just to make public the original unedited interviews you got in your archives?
I started it with absolutely no real idea of what on earth I was doing.
Okay.
I think my daughter actually kept saying to me, you should really consider having a YouTube channel. And I would always think, well, there's a lot of this stuff I don't own the rights to, or I own the rights, but they have a distributor, and so I can't use it, Thinking of the finished documentaries. However, I do have some documentaries I own the rights to. These are earlier, and some that I made a film about Martin Luther King assassination in 1989, and managed to get the BBC to give me the DVD rights, and then turned into the streaming rights much later. So I started by putting up a few things like that, and then I thought, well, let's try. There's a few interviews that are interesting. I've always thought they were interesting, such as the Rick Wright interview. They were on DVD extras, in shorter versions. Actually, the Roger Waters one from 2001 was on there in its full length of about an hour, and the Gilmore one was much shorter because the interview was much longer, the original interview. So I put up what was easily accessible to me, a few of these interviews, and I very, very quickly, realized there's an interest in this. It's not just, a few musos. Kind of, people are actually watching these, and very quickly I got 1,000 subscribers. I thought it would take weeks. Probably took 4 weeks, something like that. And then I started to think more strategically about it. Prior to the mid-90s, everything was shot on film. 16mm film. The documentaries were all made on film and then laboriously edited, or cutting up essentially and stitching together. Old school filmmaking. After the mid-90s, with the digital editing started to come in, so you then got far more scope because things are shot on tape. So with Syd Barrett film, 2001, is still using, actually 2001 is still using really over big cameras, digital Betacam cameras, like really sort of heavy, and poor guys are sort of lifting them up on their shoulders if they're doing handheld. Every time I'd suggest doing a handheld interview, there'd be a groan from. It's like, but take the Mike Leonard for instance. We're filming there, and I just said, you've got to do this handheld because it's such an amazing warren, this house. And he just wanders around all over it, picking out wonderful details, and even going up on the roof, where Pink Floyd would sit up there and doodle. And, we're taking this massive... Anyway, so what I'm getting at is that all this stuff goes down on tape, and I kept the tapes. If I hadn't kept the tapes, we wouldn't have any of this. So, the tapes have followed me around, and they're currently in a storage unit, in Oxford, in England, which hopefully is fully secure. I'm not going to name where they are in case someone just...
Yeah, better not. Yes.
So what's happened since I started the channel in May 2021, partly out of frustration with the pandemic never ending and finding it very difficult to get going making documentaries at that time. I didn't know what I was doing. I followed YouTube videos on how to start a YouTube channel. I started digitizing some of those interviews, and getting kind of interesting reactions. And essentially, what's intriguing to me is that at the core of this is that people love the content when it's not mediated in a film, because filmmaker, we were always snipping and cutting and taking bits out. And, sometimes I would feel that we weren't doing justice to the strength of the interview because you are driven by the time constraint. This is a 50-minute film in the case of the Syd Barrett film. It's very short.
Yeah, and there are two levels. I mean, there are two levels. The first level is how to conduct the interview itself, because of course you had a goal, you wanted to go somewhere, and you conducted that interview with that plan in mind.
Yeah.
And that, if you see the complete interview, like David Gilmour, for example, 1 hour and 41 minutes or something like that, of course you can see the structure, how you're doing it, and that in itself is, I wouldn't say it's a movie, but it's almost like a reportage to see.
Yes.
And that's a very interesting part of it, I would say.
Well, I'm very happy you say that. I mean, there are mixed messages that I get on the comments section, but I think there's overwhelmingly people appreciate it. I mean, I wake up in the morning, first thing I look at is all the comments that come in, and probably maybe 20% of them are negative. And I think that's because the style of the interview is to be exploratory, to give it time, to have silence. Sometimes I would always say to my camera, my DP, try not to suddenly change shots or zoom in when there's a pause, because sometimes I'll ask a question and there's a long pause, but it's very often in the pause that you can watch.
Yeah, but I have to admit, I don't understand these critics, because you film these interviews not to have a 1 hour interview, but to have perfect snippet to use for the film. So exactly. I think it's easy to understand, in my opinion.
You would think so, yeah. Thank you.
But anyway, I mean, you got more than 1 million views on it, on the Pink Floyd related videos alone. So this is unbelievable. And we as Pink Floyd fans are very grateful. And I remember being at the Pink Floyd community and getting the first links to a YouTube video, new YouTube video, and we were all very excited and watched it, and we loved it from the first moment on. So
well, that's
again,
fantastic.
You can't get really closer to Richard Wright than on this interview, because he's so shy. He never appeared anywhere. There were no interviews of him, so it's a treasure.
Yes, thank you. I think often these things also only become apparent after time. And something that's a tape sitting in a box. For this, to me, in some ways, this is like having a completely fresh look at my work. It's a great way of reviewing it, because I think we made this Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett story film in about 8 weeks once we'd finished the shoot. So I go into the editing, and 8 weeks later came out with the film the other end, and the film was shown about a week after we'd finished it on BBC, where it got a lot of attention, which was nice, including a big review by Nick Kent in the Times, I think. But when you're doing that in 8 weeks, it was literally, I sat with my good friend, my editor Ray, on day one, and he said, "Well, we've got this deadline. BBC is actually showing it on." He said, "How are we going to do this?" So I said, "Well, I think we just have to start. It's sort of literally start at the beginning, start with the chronology, and just tell the story. And we can't go back. We can't sort of go, oh, we shouldn't have done that, or we made it. Let's just do it. Let's just put it down, edit it, put it in, edit, put it, and then we'll look at the rough cut, say in 3 to 4 weeks' time. We'll just keep going until we've got it all down there. You look at everything and then you start. Where does that fit? Where does that? Now, when you're doing that, you have a very brief kind of experience watching the interview with Rick Wright, say. You watch it. You note all the good bits, all the bits that apply particularly to this film, and then you move on. Well, to look at it again, really properly and in detail, to upload it onto YouTube, 22 years later, 21 years later, you see so much more, of course.
Yes.
And you bring something very different to it, and so I can see why people now appreciate it for that as much as when it was in the film. That was a very long-winded way of describing it.
Yeah, but I totally got it. So, are there any other projects you're currently working on? Any new things to upload?
Well, there's always more to upload.
That's good to know
that
already.
Archive is, there's more to upload. It's just, I'm torn now with. We had Peter Jenner in 2001, and I've used Peter Jenner from Wish You Were Here, the interview there. I haven't put up his 2001 interview yet. Does it add anything different? Is it of interest? But the one person that I haven't used the interview of, which we did in 2001, is the other manager whose name now escapes me. Peter and...
we put it on the show notes.
Yeah. He gave a great interview, and I remember it being quite a moving interview as well. We had to make it one of those really awful, ruthless decisions when we were putting together what was going to be a 50-minute film. Was like, can we tell this story with two different managers? They're both saying filling in roughly the same pieces of the jigsaw. So we chose one and not the other. So I have the other manager. He would be probably appalled to know that I still have the interview, and I've just had it digitized. So I have to look at these and judge them for what they are. See how much we put up. I don't always put up the whole thing, but part of it. And other people, there's Sid's first real girlfriend, and she gave a really nice interview. I don't know if she wants me to use that now. I need to contact her and ask her,
Yeah.
So just on that, there's more. And then I keep going back over things like the three guys in 2011. I put up bits of their interviews in different ways. I mean, the last thing I put up was David Gilmour. The whole section where he starts to play the guitar on, he does the whole Wish You Were Here section, and then he does it then he overdubs with the 12 string, and then he sings it. And I didn't think this was going to be accepted because of music rights. I thought they'll ask me to take it down, but they haven't. So that's just up there. Now I know probably people think, oh, I've seen this. I've seen him playing this. But they haven't. They haven't seen the whole thing. And he says some very interesting things as he does it.
Okay, so we're all really looking forward to that.
That was
these bits and updates.
Went up 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so there's always more. However,
great to know.
Said all that,
Great
I'm actually very keen to make a new documentary. The one thing, when you mentioned the Genesis film, the one big lesson I got from doing the Genesis film, which even at my advanced age, I learn a trick or two, was that that film was kind of commissioned by about too many interests and too many self-interests. You have the management, you have the broadcaster, you have the production company, the distributor, and you have the members of the band. They've all got different interests, and you have Paul Muggins, me, the filmmaker, who is trying to kind of have a vision and tell a story and get it right. I mean, I think the thing what I've learned from that, because I wasn't happy with the outcome of that film, you pointed to it being in a different. I did not approve of the final. I couldn't disapprove of it. My decision was, do I keep my name on it or not? In the end, I decided I would keep my name on for professional reasons only, really. But what I loved about it were the bits of interviews that I knew that the interviews were great. I knew I had some fantastic stuff there.
Yes.
And 8 years later, I started to very sort of, tentatively put them up and see if anyone in management or anywhere else decided to take them down. And they haven't. And I think probably because they like them, because they show just how, they show a very rounded picture of the musicians. But what happened was that there is this thing where now, because of the commercialization of music and documentaries, with the rise of Netflix, etc., there's a tendency for record companies and managers to want to make these as public relations products. And it's a huge pitfall for anyone involved in making films, because your independence is inevitably, stripped away from you, or it's a drip effect. Oh no, John, no. Of course, it's entirely up to you. It's your film. Blah 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 blah.
But we would like to.
Yeah.
We would like you to do it like
Right.
this way.
But no, that's not quite right, and that, and that's, we can't have that because that's upsetting so and so, and so my absolute determination is, I'm very interested in making a new film. I'm interested in making a film about someone that I'm very excited about, have been for years, but I'm not going to take any steps towards it if the whole kind of structure is that in order to get this funded, you're going to have to, be the whipping boy of the
Get it.
the corporate music industry, essentially. It's like,
So
back
I
to
wish
have
you
a
the best of
cigar.
luck. I wish you the best of luck for that endeavor that you.
But if anyone's watching this or listening to it, do get in touch if you're interested in, because at the end of the day, the best documentaries about music are ones where the band or the musician have actually not tried to pull back. I mean, fantastic one about Metallica, where they're all in a therapy session essentially, because the band is in a terrible state. They're splitting up. They're at loggerheads, and the filmmaker is filming the whole crisis erupting around them. And at the end of the day, they said, "Oh, go ahead, what the hell?" And it's it's one of the best music documentaries ever made, because it's not there's no kind of filter of, we have to
no promotional
exactly
framing in the end.
exactly
Yeah.
so
So thank you very much for your time and all these great stories and insight. It's been wonderful talking to you. And thank you all for listening. And please do not forget to subscribe to the Fingal's Cave podcast, as well as your YouTube channel, which will be in the show notes as well. And I can say bye-bye.
thanks so much, Niels. Goodbye.